From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris here, coming to you on a Wednesday, as Leland would say. It is hump day. And we've got a good show on tap for you. Your chance to call in and ask legal questions with regard to medical malpractice. If you had a situation with a doctor, a hospital, a nurse, something like that that you felt didn't quite go right, your chance to call in and see whether or not you have a case or not, as well as if you just have questions about the law and the way it's set up, especially at this time in a pandemic. And there's been a lot of talk about protections, liability protections for businesses or doctors or hospitals when it comes to things that go wrong in treating someone with COVID-19. Where do we stand on all of that? And what kind of protections do you, as a patient or a consumer, have there? Well, we're being joined this morning by one of the very best malpractice attorneys in the country, and he happens to work right here in Middle Tennessee, and that's Clint Kelly. And he's got this Zoom down pat with the backdrop and the green screen and everything. It looks good, Clint. How are you?
I'm doing great this morning. This is the way that you could work at your home office but feel like you're out on the golf course.
That's not a bad way to be. Well, you are working, correct? You're an attorney. A lot of attorneys seem to stay busy in a variety of fields. How is it with regard to malpractice right now?
Well, it's very busy primarily because the Gallatin nursing home cases seem like the gift that keeps on giving. And in relationship to those cases, you end up getting other cases that people hear about you, and there's still people being injured by bad medical care. And so, you know, I've been staying more busy than I thought it would be.
That's interesting. I think a lot of lawyers have. Well, let's start at the beginning there. And we've talked since you were last on the show, of course. You are representing individuals with regard to that Gallatin nursing home, where early on News Channel 5 broke the story about how there was a pretty significant outbreak of COVID-19, and a lot of people got sick and some died. And you have filed the first lawsuits against that facility. What's the status right now of where that stands, and what else have you learned?
Sure. Yeah. Jennifer Krause broke that story. We all remember, I think, where we were that Friday night when we were watching TV around 10 o'clock and saw ambulances leaving the Gallatin nursing home. Wondered what in the world was going on. And she told us exactly what it was. And it was a number of people who were residents there at the facility who were exposed to COVID-19 recklessly, I might add. Exposed to that virus, and they were sent to Sumner Regional Medical Center, and many of them didn't make it back. Mm-hmm. So those cases right now are in a group, if you will, waiting to be filed. There's one case that was the first that has been filed in court. It's Bolton versus Gallatin Rehabilitation and Healing Center, which we call the Gallatin Nursing Home. And that case has been removed now from the state court to the United States District Court in Nashville, federal court. There are some issues as to whether or not that's the proper court, but in any event, that case is off and running, and I expect within the next 30 days that the rest of the cases that we have will also be filed as a large group. What I use the first case for is to try to clear through any issues that need to be briefed to help the other cases that are coming behind it. I think of it as kind of like clearing out the debris and blazing a path. That's the idea with the first case. And then when all the other cases are filed together, we should have a pretty a pathway ahead of us to getting some type of resolution that's satisfactory to the families.
And again, if you would, you just mentioned it briefly as you described that to us. What are the allegations here against the nursing home where it rises to the level of something that would be considered malpractice? COVID's out there. People get it. Sometimes it's no one's fault. Other times, I guess you would argue, more could have been done to protect someone.
Yeah, this when people think about, gee, this was just happen, too bad, you know, what people need to remember is 99.9% of the other nursing homes in the state of Tennessee got it right, protected their residents, kept them safe. This one didn't, and there are a lot of reasons why. It starts first with failing to prepare for COVID-19 when they knew it was coming, failing to have the proper protective gear in place when they knew it was coming, failing to train their staff to handle COVID-19 exposure once it was inside the facility, failing also to what we call failing to mitigate, where when you detect someone who may be infected, that room that resident in, Nick, becomes an isolation unit. By definition, it's a place where no one else is supposed to come in except other sick people. But what this nursing home was doing was they were taking sick people and moving them to other parts of the facility in close proximity to unsick or unexposed people. So the virus is jumping from one room to the next. And so you go from 2 people being exposed to 100 people being exposed, and ultimately 160 people being exposed, which was the number that we had as of April. And I think now the total tally is somewhere around 175 is the number of residents and workers who were exposed and tested positive. You know, I could go through the entire list of all the screw ups at this place, but just suffice it to say, this was a huge textbook example of corporate recklessness, and it cost a lot of lives.
I wonder if you, and I know you've paid attention to this, can give me some insight into the story. You know, there's a special session, as you know, called for the legislature by the governor, and one of 3 or 4 things they're going to look at is passing a bill that would place limits on the ability to sue for COVID exposure, kind of a protection to businesses. And I don't know how that transfers and translates over to some of the things that you're dealing with, but I don't understand why we need something like that. I mean, it says, well, you can still sue, but you have to prove negligence, and this is to protect against frivolous lawsuits. Well, isn't a device, an apparatus already in place to prevent that? I mean, you're not going to win unless you can prove negligence, and, you know, there are punishments for filing frivolous. So what is this lawsuit all about, or rather this bill all about?
Okay, let me unpack this because there are a lot of parts to it. The big picture of this is a major payoff to the Chamber of Commerce. They spent untold amounts of money on lobbyists to get this passed in the regular session during the summer, where it failed because they got greedy, because they wanted the bill to apply backwards to cases that had already occurred. In other words, think of it as they were trying to change the rules of the football game after kickoff.
Yeah.
Can't do that, okay? And so the House rightly refused to pass the bill, knowing that it was going to be challenged as unconstitutional. Well, now they've gone back to the drawing board. They have basically presented the same law, but this time they've drawn a line in the sand that all cases that accrue, meaning all claims where people have been injured and pre-suit notices have been submitted, all cases where that's been done by August the 3rd will not be touched by this legislation. Why is that provision in there? Because of our people, our residents, families, and their friends, in addition to other people who read about this and just were outraged that there was going to be protection provided to this nursing home, called legislators, people who have power, and rang the phones off the hook, burned up the emails, and it got hot. I'll tell you straight up, I had legislators calling me, asking me to call the dogs off. So people ever wonder, does grassroots work? It absolutely does. And because of that pressure, and frankly, I think they got shamed, if you want to get right down to it, they changed the law to make sure that it would not apply backwards to the Gallatin nursing home cases. And I got to give a lot of credit to Representative Will Lambert, the GOP majority leader. He spearheaded this change. He protected his people, if you will. And because of that, we're going to get a law that will not touch the Gallatin case.
Hey, well, let me ask you this.
Make sure that's clear.
Okay, and I hear you, and I have no doubt that made the difference. But what I don't understand is the way this law has been packaged and at least been presented to some degree by those who want it to have it passed. Say, well, you know, I mean, this is not going to affect cases where there's clear cases of negligence, which is what you're arguing in this case. How had they not made that change? Could this have affected the Gallatin case where, you know, we're going to have to wait until we see it play out in court if it ever gets that far. But you seem to say this is blatant. Okay, so if it's blatant, would this law, if it had applied to you and it passes, have affected the Gallatin cases, and how so?
Yeah, and let me tell you why. Anytime you have provisions that adjust the burden of proof, okay, make it harder for you to prove your claim, there's always the chance in trial that burden will be too difficult to overcome, even if you think you've got the facts to do it. And let me tell you what they're doing. The normal law, let's just think of as baseline, is negligence. You have to prove more likely than not that the facility violated the rules. You and I have been talking about this for years. That's the normal standard of care, okay? What the legislature's doing, they're raising that standard way up here to what's called gross negligence. Gross negligence, Nick, is so close to intent that it almost is intent, which is virtually impossible to prove. Because let's be real, no one in a nursing home or in a business wants to hurt people, okay? But there are people who are sloppy, people who are reckless, people who simply don't care, okay? Those people could get wrapped up into this law and protected when they shouldn't be. And the worst part about it is the people in the nursing homes are different than the people, like, as I've said, me and you, we can go to a restaurant or we can go to a bar. If we see people not wearing masks or we look around and it doesn't look clean, we can just turn and walk right out, okay? That's
right.
how we can protect ourselves. These nursing home residents didn't have that option. They're stuck. They are captives. And so if someone is sloppy in preventing exposure, they have no choice or option. They're going to catch it. And that's what makes this law unfair for them. And I think the legislators looked at this and realized that by trying to apply this law to the Gallatin nursing home, even if it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, it's just not right, Nick. It's not right.
Yeah, and the concern is, it's protected that, but you know what? There's going to be other Gallatin nursing homes possibly in the future. As a consumer, you have to be out there and ask yourself, all right, why the heck is this being moved forward? You understand, you said Chamber of Commerce behind it. They want to protect business. They don't want some of these places going bankrupt because they screw up. Look, if you screw up because you're negligent and people die, you deserve to be out of business if that is proven. I don't get it. I don't get it. Constituents need to make sure they call and find out exactly what these laws are all about. I'm not in favor, Clint, of frivolous stuff, okay? And frivolous lawsuits sometimes are filed and people are after for money sometimes and you're like, wait, you don't have a case. But in the cases where there's damage and a law like this is going to protect because you just want to protect business, it's just a dumb move.
Well, Nick, there is such a thing as a frivolous defense, okay? And what this law does, it protects frivolous defenses because any business owner or any healthcare provider can come in and basically admit they did a poor job and still get the case tossed out of court, even if it would otherwise be what we consider to be a frivolous defense where they ought to pay the poor injured person because they screwed up. Get a pass.
Yeah.
The one thing I want to tell you about real quick, think about football players who could be affected by this legislation. Just think about that.
You know what, Clint? Let's touch a bit on that because I know a lot of people are talking when we come back. We're going to talk about that. College football, where we stand, the illnesses that could come into play. Some leagues are going to play, some aren't. We've got some phone calls for you as well. So we'll take a break. We'll be back with more with Malpractice attorney Clint Kelly right after this.